Greetings and welcome. My name is Prashan De Viseer. We're here to have some conversations with a very important demographic in Sri Lanka. And this series is entitled Conversations with Gen Z Sri Lanka. This generation was born after the year 2000. Many of them didn't live through some of the most brutal periods of the war. They didn't see some of the insurrections, but they definitely have experienced the final stages of the war to a certain extent. They maybe have been 9 or 10 years old at the time, and they've definitely seen the economic collapse and the political turmoil. And it's a generation that's asking a lot of questions, important questions. And we want to sit here, listen to them, hear what they have to say, and really look at what's our responsibility to them as an older generation, as they walk into adulthood, as they're looking at their future. And very much their future is aligned with our nation's future. So let's enjoy this conversation. I'm so glad. Our first conversation is happening here in Colombo, and we'll continue this conversation in different parts of the country in different languages. But I'd like to introduce those who have stepped forward to be part of this conversation. So here are some introductions.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Medushan. I'm here because I believe there is hope for our nation, and I believe our nation can be transformed.
Hello everyone, I'm Nabil Bari, and I just completed my A-levels and I'm waiting for my results. I'm especially here because of the fact that I firmly believe, like I told all of my peers here today, that you can't fight a battle without being in the battlefield, and that's something I firmly believe in, and I know and I pray that Sri Lanka would change and transform to the better.
Hi everyone, I'm Subhashitanya De Silva. Basically, I'm someone who asks a lot of questions, but today I'm here to learn, reflect and share.
Hi, I'm Shavindri Pires. The reason I'm here today is I think there's a lot of things that Gen Z faces and there's a lack of communication between generations, so I'm here to sort of reflect and learn from others as well.
Hi, I'm Shakib Mohideen. So I'm the ultimate pessimist, but I'm here to, because I think that, in Sri Lanka we have a future, but that future is dependent on change and quick change in order to facilitate that.
Hello, my name is Hudson Jerian. So I represent the esports community. So the reason why I'm here is because I've seen what Sri Lanka can do as an esports unit for the world, and I just want to see a change and see our players in our country reach the fullest potential. So I just want to see that change happening. So that's why I entered this conversation.
So thank you once again for joining, and I have a series of questions, and I want you to share very honestly and openly, not just from your perspective, from what you're hearing your peers talk about. And I'm sure you're talking about this a lot. You're just walking into adulthood. There are so many aspirations, so many things you're looking forward to, but then there's also realities in Sri Lanka that may hinder the journey that you want to go. And your friends are talking about it, you're talking about it, you're reflecting. I want you to share as much of it as you can. So my first thing is, when you're looking at Sri Lanka, what are things that you absolutely love? That you just say, you know what, I'm so proud about these aspects of Sri Lanka. I love this. I don't think I'll ever want to give this up. But then also, realistically speaking, what are things that you absolutely do not like? Things that irritate you, frustrate you, maybe even want you to feel hopeless about this country. Let's be honest, and not just you, but I want you to reflect on what you're hearing your peers say. And if you feel like the others are repeating some things you said, obviously don't mention it again, but new things from your perspective. All right, who wants to go first?
I think something that a lot of people I've heard, especially myself, reflect on is this idea of family and culture. I feel like because of the fact that we grew up around our extended family, we place a lot of value on our aunts, our uncles, our cousins. There is a lot of safety nets that we have. We have someone to talk to, someone to turn to in case of crisis. There's always someone helping each other out. Regardless of other issues in Sri Lanka, I think there's always someone who if you are lucky, you have the ability to turn to. And I think that's something which is very undervalued and sometimes underappreciated in Sri Lanka. But something I think that is really frustrating, and this is conversations we've had since school days, in families, even at work, is that it constantly feels like politics is never changing in Sri Lanka. It's always the same guard. And I think that is something which frustrates people, which is because politics is in every part of Sri Lanka. It governs our laws, from things from the cost of living to the financial situation to urban housing to the way communities get rights to even the way I think things like rape and penalties, social media bans. All of these things are governed by the same guard who have the same interest, which is to keep essentially power and rights to themselves. So then it sort of feels like if the guard is never changing, if there's no sense of change, and it's like one party to the next, then how are you having consistency? It feels like that the reason there's so much apathy, especially within our generation, is because we've seen the very same people who were there in our parents' time, sometimes, and even being there now. Sometimes people who our grandparents voted for, our parents voted for, now we are also voting for them. But their policies never change. They don't adjust themselves to the economic crisis, and it feels very self-interested.
Something I'm frustrated, I can get frustrated is the lack of accountability when it's come to political aspect and other educational aspects in Sri Lanka. So if I have to be very specific, you like it or not, at the end of the day, things like leadership, specifically the parliament, will affect to your family matters at the end of the day. And there is a stigma around it, which is very sad, because when someone know, like personally, if someone know that I am interested on political science or anything, they think it is not good to work in that aspect. So what I have to say is when it's come to accountability of people, there are a lot to improve in the sense, so just imagine we vote to people, right, and they get into the power, and after the voting we just give up, we don't follow up like what's happening, the people we have voted, what they are doing. So practically most of the time we don't do the follow up, we easily tend to complain, especially in Sri Lanka. So when I see that lack of accountability, I get frustrated. One fact, and the other thing is what I like in Sri Lanka, one of the main things is we have a very, very dynamic biodiversity, and past few months we were, in my group, I was able to travel around 6 Asian countries, and something I realize is it is unbelievable, because in movies we see other countries are very clean and all, but something I realize, our country is very clean in comparison to a lot of countries in the Asian region, Asian Pacific region. So I love it. I love how our country act as a hotspot for when it's come to biodiversity. So those two are the factors I have to point out. Thank you.
In terms of what I really love about Sri Lanka, it's that it's home. And I think you can travel all around the world, but there is no better place to come back, to properly have a cup of tea, stay in your balcony and look at the view. And I think that's what I really love about Sri Lanka. And I think this is relatable to all of us here. And that's my aspect and view of why I love Sri Lanka, because it's home. The thing that I don't like as Sri Lankans, this is something very common. It's that we undermine ourselves as Sri Lankans. In a global context, when we maybe travel around the world, we feel that we are somewhat, in the sense of comparison to others, that we are below the rest of the world. And that's something I really don't like. I think that we have had our fair share of legends, people who have really been change makers and visionaries in the global context. People like Kumar Sangakkara, Lakshman Kadirgama, and all of them. And I think that's what I really don't like. I think as Sri Lankans, we have an identity, and we should preserve it. Because like Lakshman Kadirgama says, he says the icing on top of the cake was Oxford, but the cake was baked at home, and that is Sri Lanka. So that's something I really wish we could change.
Something that I like about Sri Lanka is about the diverse culture that we have, and the natural beauty of our nature. Like the beauty of our nature, so something that is unique, and our people. I really love about our people in Sri Lanka, even though from different cultures, they have something that their heart is belong to Sri Lanka. What I dislike about Sri Lanka is corruption. When we're growing up, we learned that Sri Lanka is the pearl of the Indian Ocean. But when we talk with other people in other countries, the main thing that they talk about is corruption. We are not anymore the pearl of the Indian Ocean, or they don't know Sri Lanka. for the natural resources that we have, but they know Sri Lanka now because of the corruption that we are going through.
Okay, so I basically agree with what I like about Sri Lanka, the sense of community, the fact that we can, all of us from different communities can sit down and have a discussion is proof of that. But what I don't like about Sri Lanka is accountability, not in terms of politicians, in terms of ourselves, right? We complain about the people in power, but we are the people who put them in power in the first place. Why? I think the two main reasons, at least from what I've analyzed, is that Sri Lankans tend to vote for people based on populism, rhetoric of what the promises, the blanket promises that people give you, instead of the policy that they're actually proposing. So a person who would propose like really good policy won't get elected because they don't know how to market themselves enough. They don't have the resources to do that. And we believe in what people tell us instead of actually looking into it ourselves. So I think if we change that, we can change a lot about this country.
Yeah, so I would agree with everyone's point of view here, because in Sri Lanka, the first thing that comes into my mind is food. I know everyone just likes food, so I like food too. So the things I really don't like in our nation is the thing is like the leaders, in a perspective of a leader, I feel like, like there are lack of leaders who understand the requirements of Gen Z as well as the older generation, because as Gen Z we couldn't, I'm in a perspective where I think like Gen Z is not only the requirement, but there's all the generations requirements has to be met. So that's where I stand for. So I think the lack of leaders who have that potential is a reason why I see Sri Lanka in the same place. So for me, as I said, I'm from the esports community, because working with my peers and friends, I understand the depth and the potential my team has and the other teams has as well. But thing is, we don't have the proper infrastructure, and the people don't understand the value that esports can be a money-making industry for Sri Lanka, but no one really understands the value of these things. So as a Gen Z and as a person who's representing that, I think that's the biggest thing that I really hate.
I want you to reflect on one situation that you experienced in your lifetime, right? Obviously about 2 decades, right? That really brought you to a really low moment about Sri Lanka. Not a personal situation, something that happened in the collective that really brought you, it was a low mark for you. It was like a moment of depression or a moment of almost hopelessness. What was that moment? And then also one moment in your lifetime, collectively, that you were brimming with pride and hope and optimism about your country. Now, if the truth is there was nothing that's happened in the last 20 years that gave you that moment, collective moment, that's fine. Or if there's no moment that really brought you down, that's fine too. But if there's one moment, without explaining the moment, just tell what was that incident.
I think it's when our A-level exams kept getting postponed. It felt like we were like just frozen in time and just constantly waiting, and exams were never going to happen. We were never going to like pass, we were always going to fail, and it just felt like our lives at that point, like we couldn't see anything beyond that.
For me, yeah, it's the point from the Easter bombing to the COVID-19 pandemic. That was a very low point in time for me, because it was very stagnant. I felt like I aged 3 years by doing nothing in that period of time, because but a time where I felt collectively that we've achieved something was when we won the 2014 T20 Cricket World Cup. I think that was probably, I was sick that day, and that was probably one of the, I think, best moments of my life as a Sri Lankan, that collective happiness that we all had.
Yeah, I would agree with my friend here, because that's exactly what I was want to be saying as well. The World Cup, the vibes that it gave us, like it made us so proud, like being a small nation, we could compete against those bigger countries. And even I relate to esports once again. So looking at that, we understood that, we still have hope. We can still do this and bring pride to our nation. So that was one of the moments that I had that leap of faith, just to try something out for esports. And that was the biggest happiness that I had.
What depressed me more was when I saw my friends who were schooling together, they had to leave Sri Lanka because they had no hope in our nation. They because of the inflation, because of the pressure from their family, their parents, they had no hope, so they had to send their children to other countries, and it made me sad more, and it made me depressed. And one thing, like I'm a cricket fan, so I'll agree with my peers here. Yes.
2014.
One thing I recently got not depressed, extremely sad about was when recently I had to go to Vavuniya and engage with the community regarding this water pollution. And when I realized how these improper management in waste and agriculture impact on those children and how they die just because they don't have enough clean water to drink, it was very, very sad to witness that, listen to their stories. It was very sensitive. Other than that, one of the happiest thing I could say now, I feel happy to, I feel hopeful to listen to all of you. So
Obviously, we've had a lot of our friends leave this country. Not just from your generation, this time even from my generation. People who were kind of upper middle class, doing well, got a career, things are going well, but they felt hopeless. They started thinking of their young children, and they thought, we need to pack up and leave. But I'm sure you've talked to hundreds of friends who felt similarly. Tell me, what are they thinking? What are the main concerns? They're saying, we are leaving, I don't want to stay here. I've heard some A-level students say, I'm just doing my A-levels with an intention to get a student visa to go somewhere and never come back. Right? Or sometimes you hear people say, I don't even want to do my A-levels, if there's a way for me to leave before that. So that's a little bit more than we have experienced with other generations. Because during the war, there was a factor of saving your life, or there's a survival, people left for those reasons. But right now, it's a growing out of your capacity to even hope, feeling there's nothing left. And people leave, and not happily. They're leaving family behind, they're leaving. So what sort of conversations are you hearing on this whole new exodus from Sri Lanka, the brain drain that's happening from your generation? How many of you have had a friend already leave the country? Okay. How many of you have had at least 10 friends leave the country so far? Okay. All right. How many of you have family members who have left the country? Not immediate or... Okay. So that's becoming a reality, and that loss, it's kind of like death, but it's not, right? Like, so you lose a close friend, you're not interacting as much, you're not engaging as much, and eventually it's just going to fade away, and that reality is there. So it's almost like the sense of mourning that's happening in the last year or so. 1 million Sri Lankans left for studies or for good, just last year alone. And we don't even know the exact numbers for this year yet. So that's there. So what's that reality like? Tell me some of the conversations you're having. Go ahead.
Like I've had a lot of conversations with is regarding the difference between our generation and our parents, is because I think a lot of us, like our parents when they were in their late 20s, early 30s, they had enough money to sometimes often build a house or even like rent a house to their family, or in the process of building it, they had the ability to support their partner, they had the ability to provide, like have kids in general. Whereas like this generation, it's like if you're 28, like there's so many people who are just like, okay, like can I even afford to build a house? Can I even afford to like move out, like out of my parents' house? Like, can I even afford to pay my like parents' medical bills? And I've had conversations with my friends who are just like, what's the point of staying in this country if we can't even earn to provide for ourselves outside our house? And I think that like that sort of thing actually gets to them, where it's not necessarily it's not even the possibility of a future, it's a lack that they believe that Sri Lanka won't change. And I think there is a certain amount of like history also to back that up, because when we talk about issues in Sri Lanka, when we talk about even the Easter bombings, there is a lack of investigation into that. You have commissions after commissions, and you have people forming like parties who are just like, oh yeah, we'll form this and this policy, but what is the actual change that you're going to do when there is evidence to show that you never did it in the past?
So I believe that it's a narrative that is created by a root issue. So the narrative is that, one, there is no job security in Sri Lanka, and two, there is no security for your secondary education as well in Sri Lanka, and that is caused by a root issue, because the root issue is that we do not have the proper resources to accommodate children into university. And the fact is that so many people who are talented are just not able to keep up with how hard the educational and how challenging our educational system actually is, because it is very challenging. And if you compare to any other system in the world, the volume of it is so big that people tend to regress. They can't, even if you're smart, you can't necessarily keep up if you want to do something that you enjoy other than, education. So you either you study completely, you dedicate yourself to medicine, or you do something else that you're passionate about. You can't choose both. You have to choose one of them. So in that sense, a lot of people end up, because it's so difficult, a lot of people end up not choosing their education and choosing to do things that they're passionate about, something that they would love to do in the future. But then again, that doesn't really guarantee job security in Sri Lanka, right? The arts don't really guarantee you being successful. You can't become an actor in Sri Lanka. You can't become a writer. You either become a doctor, lawyer, an engineer, or that's like the most stable jobs, or you're not secure in your job, right? So that idea, that narrative is what created people to think, oh, there's no future in this country anymore, because even if I do okay, I won't be able to go to a good university, I won't be able to go get a good job. So why not study in a foreign university that has a foreign affiliation, go abroad, start a family, and I can, if my parents can't come here, I'll send them money all the time because I'm earning enough here. And then that creates, so when people become successful like that, it motivates other people to do that as well. So like if I see my friend in Australia earning like $30,000 a month at our age, and we actually do have a friend who does that, I wonder what I'm doing in my life half the time, because I'm doing my A-levels, he's done and he's in university earning $30,000 a month. So sometimes, so that in turn, for me, I'm strong in my belief, but in that this country can change, so I don't want to leave. But that's what motivates a lot of people to want to move.
So I would feel like the barrier between the lack of knowledge is also a biggest reason, I guess, because we know like in each season there is a way that we can earn money. Like even we know our education is free, but the real thing is we are just still sticking to that book kind of education. Only things that's written in the book is what we learn. But I feel there's far more that we can explore as Gen Z, and even, I mean, everyone can agree on that point, I guess, because I think there's especially SaaS marketing, SAS marketing. So these type of things are really opening up opportunities for the Gen Z. Even in our country, the thing is we don't have the knowledge, and even the people above us and the leaders, they don't have a knowledge of how to be a correct way of making money to this nation. So even my friends, like as my friends also said here, so they are abroad in our age, they are buying their vehicles, everything, and they're sharing their status, and they're asking, what are you guys doing? The only reason, as my friend said as well, the reason why we are in this nation is because we know this nation has potential, and if we have correct leaders who have the correct mindset, who can really make an impact, I feel that once again we can bounce back and do greater things. So I have lost many friends, but I don't want to lose any more friends, so that's why I want to speak about that as well.
I believe intergenerational conflict also is playing a huge part here, where even now most of my friends left because their parents were frustrated because they were suffering, and they thought that their children also will be suffering if they are in this nation, in our nation, in Sri Lanka. So they left because they didn't want to see their children. They want to send their children away because they want to see their children suffering in this nation. So what I believe is our parents also, because they lost hope, they are raising this voice that we have no hope in our nation. So that lie is also has been rooted in our generation, within our parents, because they don't have hope in our nation. So they want to they want to put this voice out saying, okay, because we didn't have hope, okay, now our children also doesn't have hope. So I think that conflict also plays a huge part here.
In my perspective, I think this entire issue with a large percentage of Gen Z that goes to another country abroad to maybe study and settle down, I feel like the root cause is digitalization. And I'm really sorry to my colleague here who is into esports, but I feel like now we are in this current generation where all you need is a smartphone. You just need a Gmail address. You can go onto any social media site, and you're this global person, right? You have a global image. Everyone knows about you. You can just make your page public, and everyone knows about you. So the amount of information you get fed off is a lot. So I feel like the reason that we see a large percentage of especially our generation that flies away and that migrates that settles down abroad is due to this cause that they see this image of a really prosperous nation, and they run away from their problems. That's a very negative aspect to talk of, but that's the truth. And something I'd really like to say is that I know that we speak about our successful peers and friends that are abroad and that have done well, but that's a very small percentage of the total population that goes abroad. You have people who maybe for 1 or 2 generations afterwards, they still suffer abroad until they get some stability in life. So I think, this is the problem here. The root cause is that everyone's running away from their problems. So they just look at this entire image of a good country. They go, run away, settle down, and this sense of national service towards our country is just taken away. That's my personal perspective.
When it's come to this whole problem, I think the root cause is the quality of education. We really need that immediate a solution for that specifically. So what I mean is we don't produce people who align with the problems we have, because the resources are not updated. And usually when we study at school, we don't study to comprehend, we study to memorize. Therefore we can't create. So it's very needed when it's come to education, the quality. There is a very huge gap, and I guess there are when it's come to the psychological aspect of the nation, I think there are ego issues in the sense. So when it's come to people going abroad, basically my peers, their answer is the quality of life. They say they can have a very good well-being if they live in another country, which is a good answer. But the question is whether we are living in an illusion, because I guess in our mind there is 3 aspects: ego, superego, and our instincts. Most of the people who are going abroad, they are following their instincts. And we really need a healthy ego to balance the reality and the illusion, right? The reality is the superego. So what I guess is we really need to have this mental education as well. And it's really sad because we don't produce creators, and we don't know any acts. We don't know how. Other countries, they are talking about how to improve the policy making, how to get youth into policy making. But in our country, we don't know even how to observe the policies, right? So there is a huge gap. And we need to identify how to manage our resources as well. For that, we need conscious leaders.
Very good. I just want to transition from what you just said. You said we need good leaders. And one analogy that I constantly use is, let's think that we're all drinking from this stream of water, and we are dependent on this stream of water. But uphill, there is this factory that's just disposing of nuclear waste into the water. Now, there are a few things we can do. Walk away and try and find another stream and complain about how bad this is, or walk upstream and stop the pollution of nuclear waste into the water. And a lot of people are like, it's impossible, I don't want to. And we know where it's happening. More often than not, it's the leaders of a nation that are ransacking a nation that's doing that. But not too many people want to get involved to try and change that reality. And so they'd rather just leave. And that's one. The other analogy I always use is, the grass is not greener on the other side. The grass is greener where you pour the water and where you invest your time. And so some people who've left here, some of my friends, they used to work an 8 to 5 job. They made a salary, they had time for their family, they were okay. Now they're in Canada or wherever, they're working an 8 to 5 plus Uber in the evening, plus doing another job in the weekends, all of that. And they're trying to make it, because you're just going in half mid-career. They've left and they're trying to make it. And then they're realizing, yes, I'm making more money, but I'm putting so much effort. If I had put that much effort here, maybe I could have had another successful small business on the side. And they're also spending about $50,000 to pay for their spouse's higher education, because to have the visa, you need to have one of the spouse working, a full-time student. So $50,000 for an education plus working 40-hour weeks, now 60-hour weeks, could have been transferred here with so that whole question of the grass is greener where you invest in it. So that's the reality, and obviously something very important. The other that we kind of only see the successful stories and assume that's everybody's story, because social media creates that false narrative, right? You're not sharing the horrible moments in your life where you look horrible, you just woke up in the morning and you look horrible and you just take a picture and say, this is me. You're taking pictures when you're at your best. You're taking pictures of the most joyful moments in your life, the best scenery, the best experience and all that. And so our friends who've gone abroad, they're sending us their highlight reel of life. They're not showing about the extra hours, and we're assuming that's life. And that's also a false notion. Some do make it. But then the question is, I want to move on. So then, if your house has been broken into by a bunch of thieves, and they're ransacking your house, your quality of living and everything is down, you have the choice of defending your house or to walk away from the house and let them have the house. So technically we've been ransacked by corrupt politicians and individuals and certain entities around those who are ransacking this nation. So why don't we have more young people say, I want to get involved in the political arena, I want to get involved in leadership, I want to go upstream and stop the nuclear waste that's been thrown into my stream, I want to fight the thieves out of my house. Why less of that and more of let me pack up and leave?
One fact which came to my mind was, when we work in policy making, it's a collective effort, right? But people are not, sometimes here people are not able to work collectively, in the sense they are not able to understand the perspective of a lawyer, and it can be different to a perspective of a doctor, and it can be entirely different to a perspective of an entrepreneur, right? And we don't give enough space for the informal communities to express their perspective as well. There is a huge gap in between those communities. So I think when it's come to the collective effort, there is a problem, in the sense they take the problem personally.
Regards to that question, Prashan, like what I think that really comes out to my mind is this one of the final few scenes in Julius Caesar, the play, where Julius Caesar says, Brutus, dear Brutus, the fault is not in our stars but in ourselves, meaning that it's not our fate that's the issue, but it's ourselves, it's us that who has to change. So I think this notion that everyone has, that everyone says, Sri Lanka is this, Sri Lanka needs system change, Sri Lanka needs to transform itself. It's true, but we ourselves have to change for that. And like my colleague Shakib told initially in his segment about accountability, I think it's this sense that we can change our nation, but it's in the most smallest way of possible. It's simply drinking a milk packet and putting it to a trash can without just polluting the streets. That's how it starts. And then we start off with other things, driving in our own lanes, respecting road traffic rules, respecting women, ensuring that females have safety to maybe walk in the streets after 6-7 p.m. Because these are norms that have to change. And I think regarding our house has been ransacked by thieves, I think the best thing is to defend ourselves. It's to change. It's to make sure that our houses have the safety, has the CCTV camera, maybe has a secure dog that will protect us. And this is what we need, and that's my personal perspective.
For a change to happen, it's not just our generation, but all generations should come together. So what happens is, because they don't value our perspective or generation's perspective, our generation's perspective, there's a conflict between there, and there's no freedom, or there's no space for freedom of speech. So because of that reason, like, we cannot express our ideas, or we cannot express what we can do for the betterment of this nation. So and I believe, like, all generations should take responsibility for our actions. If we take responsibility for our actions, I think we can make a change in this nation.
So I would like to, in terms of Gen Z, right, I don't think that it's true that people in Gen Z are apathetic to politics, because I think most of our lives most of us have just hit 20, 21, right? We've been kindergarten to make policy change the last 10 to 15 years. And I think when we actually had the power to do something in our generation, you saw the Aragale, right? We actually, for the first time in our history, ousted a president from power in terms of politically out of power, and that is mainly because of support from Generation Z to show, like I said before in my accountability segment, that we are very coerced by rhetoric, but we finally woke up then, and it was an interesting wake-up call for not only Gen Z but a lot of people. And you saw a lot of young people from university, so many people in that area near Golf Face, like standing up, and we actually achieved some change. So I believe that Gen Z, if we carry on like this, we can make even greater change.
Great point. So Gen Z was pretty much the catalyst for that, right? Current university students and maybe young adults, they're the ones who, other generations don't believe non-violent protesting could have helped. And most often than not, in previous generations, when they did protest, it became violent. But that was amazing for Gen Z. How many of you were at the Aragale? How many of you were actively involved in some way, shape or form? Don't worry, the CID is not coming up. Yeah. So, and you've had many people go there. So that's a sign of hope from this generation, for sure. Anything else to add to this discussion?
Something which I realized is that when you're in school, unless you have family members which are involved, like being a doctor, being a lawyer, involved within civil society, you don't necessarily see the work. Like, you see it from a very outside perspective. Like, if your parents are in like other institutions like education, etc., unless your parents are involved, you don't really interact with these fields. And there's a lack of also like help which schools give, like sit down with you and explain, okay, these are your options, these are like the particular salary ranges, these are the roadblocks you're going to come. And there's also lack of interaction with, like for example, with the civil society and kids, with government services and school children, with education and school children. There's no cross intersection. So because of that, there are so many principles which children don't learn within school. I mean, all of us know that the Sri Lankan education system is sitting in front of a textbook and seeing how much you can memorize in the space of an hour. That's not very practical, because when you go into careers, when you go into jobs, it's not like how much you can memorize. It's like soft skills, it's hard skills that you have learned. I think memorization is like probably 10% of it, unless you're like a doctor or a lawyer. And even then you have to rely like a lot on your feet. And I think even things like critical thinking, or even things like political principles, you don't necessarily engage with it, and that's like the basic foundation of any institution. I think that's something which is like hugely missing, which is why I think like even Generation Z, it's like it feels like people like label like them as like having no direction. It's because we weren't given that direction when we were younger.
Yes, just to add up on that, we were just speaking about topic of Aragale, so just something came up to my mind as well. So yes, Gen Z really played a big part to that, but what I feel in the Aragale was like everything went well, but even at the last moments, we understood that, even after doing all those things, even after the former president was dethroned, I would use the word dethroned, so even after it happened, even everyone came to an understanding that we can't, after doing that also, we don't have a proper person to give it to the next, like the exchange is not available because we didn't have a proper person to give it to the other person. So that I think everyone is in the same page on that. So that's how corrupt our nation is, because we really don't know what's next, because we've been always thinking like the major like the, how can I say, the parties will always do the things this year, next year. We're always expecting things, but nothing just changes. So I think if even at that moment, I think that's the best example, because no one knew what's going to happen next, because we weren't ready, we weren't prepared. And I think even us, I think we all have a personal responsibility, as everyone was saying, the personal accountability. I think for a change to happen, even when a good leader comes into power, we should do our part. If we don't do our part, I think it's like a layer after layer, a structure. If every layer comes together, I feel like Sri Lanka can bounce back, because we are expecting a reset. Because in this way, if we carry on, I don't think we can just do minor changes, but I'm expecting a reset to happen. For that, I think we should have a proper leader who understands all these things, understands the values of all the generations.
Spoken like a true gamer. Reset. You have to have the new game structure going in, right? Brilliant. I love your answers. And this is, if some of you are wondering, why don't we have this level of maturity, critical thinking, and substance in Parliament? And here in a coffee shop in Colombo, there is more depth. That's part of the problem. Why don't we have people? Are we saying that our parents' generation and our grandparents' generation didn't have people of substance? No, we did. They didn't get involved in politics. They didn't get involved in government. They said that was dirty and dangerous, and they stayed away. And the worst of a generation went in and took over. That's why we have locker room talk and vulgar activities happening in Parliament when we should be talking substance. So hopefully we transfer this into more realms of influence and power. So moving from that, how do you feel that you're misunderstood? Because I think your generation, and I'm a millennial, even our generation, there's a pretty big gap. Partly you guys were born into a world where social media was already there. You're born into a more digitized. All of you grew up in a household that may have had a smartphone. You had internet. I don't think you guys even know what dial-up internet is. You all have been, okay, I lost the room there. Okay, so, it's a whole different reality. But there's a chasms between Gen Z and millennials, and obviously even more with the boomers and so on. How are you misunderstood? What are those places, and how is that affecting Sri Lanka's reality right now?
This is a bit of a personal example, but something I realized growing up is that a lot of our parents' generations have went through very horrific things, like the JVP riots, the war, 1983, what happened. And I don't think but a lot of our generation, at least in the circles that I grew up with, they were not exactly aware of the war because our parents didn't talk. I know that there were several friends in my circle, including myself, where our parents talked about the war, but there were several other people in the extended friend circles that I had where the war wasn't talked about. So when you grow up and then you find out about it in school, then you're just okay. And then this is something which it was 30 years. It's a huge part of Sri Lanka's history, but it's not taught in our schools. It's not talked about sometimes within certain family circles, and that itself causes a huge divide, because then you're just you go out and your main source of information is either your parents or your school. You don't get that, you hit 20s and you're suddenly racing to catch up. And I think one of the issues is because the experiences aren't talked about, you also struggle to understand things that your parents and your grandparents went through. And that itself, even within work circles, even within even just having normal conversations with adults, it's there's always this level of oh, y'all are so entitled, y'all were given so many opportunities. And that is true, we do have opportunities. But also at the same time, we grew up in an age of social media. No one told us how to cope with it. So much of serotonin, so much of dopamine. We see all these as a lot of people talked about, you see all these glamorous lifestyles, and you're constantly taught to want more things instead of being satisfied with what you have. And parents don't have these conversations. We don't talk about sexual education. We don't talk about rape. I mean, I believe in the grade, when I was in school, the grade 10 or 11 textbook, it literally said, if you wear short clothes, you're most likely going to get raped. That is the sort of education you have in Sri Lanka. And there is no clarity on that. So people grow up getting frustrated. Children aren't taught emotional regulation. So when you become an adult, people automatically label entitled and called all these things, when in reality it's a whole host of reasons, and it's not just an entire generation which is just ineffectual because we are Generation Z.
That's a very good point about Sri Lanka's education system, right? You've never learnt about post-independent Sri Lanka. You don't know what happened from 1948, maybe the Donner and some of the constitutional stuff, the first few years. After 1970, 72, we're done. But there was 30 years of civil war, and we know nothing about the root causes, what happened, what are the grievances, how did this end, what are the ramifications of that we don't know, and we're still reeling from the effects of the civil war. And then most of your generation doesn't know anything about the insurrections. What happened during the JVP? What was their ideology? What sort of bloodbath? That was the first time Sri Lanka saw a bloodbath, right? And that level of 60,000 people dying. How many of you have had time to learn about that or in the education system formally? No. Formally. So where did you learn about it? Where did you learn about the JVP insurrections and the war and all that? Where do you get your information?
My parents.
parents? Huh? Internet. So, sorry? At the workplace. So that's a huge part of our society that you have very little formal or in-depth learning on. Yeah, so those things have ramifications. But there are things that you know that your parents and maybe even millennials don't have as much insight to. There are certain strengths within Gen Z that are unique. And for our country to meet its potential, we need to tap into things that you know you're exposed to, you're just naturally better at. True? I'm not making that up, right? There are things that you know you're better at as a generation. What are those things? And how do you wish our country would tap into those resources to really benefit from?
Yeah, I think as a generation, something we're really good at is to accept our mistakes. And by this I mean, like, if you look at it from a global perspective, let's say we see something happening in a certain place, we'd be the first set of people to accept if our stance is wrong. For example, let's say two people fight with each other, and one person accidentally murders the other, right? And we get the information, we get the real story out there saying that, okay, this was the root cause of this issue, right? We would be the first generation as Gen Z to accept that. Because if you see around the world, amongst all the conflicts that's happening around the entire globe, our generation has a large part to play in it. And the fact that our generation is this generation that truly filters all the information and accepts the truth is something that I think it truly outshines amongst other generations.
I think we were talking about information, misinformation and disinformation. When it's come to media literacy, I guess there are a lot of things happening around us, and I think as people who born after 2004, we have that ability to unconsciously prioritize our day-to-day life, because a lot of things are happening, but still we are able to prioritize to a certain extent. It depends according to per person. Another thing is question the answers. Like in comparison to the other generations, we don't easily accept the answer. We entertain it to a certain extent. And I guess in comparison to other generations, we have more green skills because of the things like climate change and the advancement in technology. We try to balance it. So that ability to thrive in those, like while balancing those two aspects, I guess it's a strength.
Yeah, so I'm not going to talk about disinformation or misinformation, but I'm just going to talk about information as a whole. This is the age of information, right? And it's only going to get, better, more developed, in the sense that we have so much information about the world at our fingertips, at our phones. And back then, if we wanted to history, like I remember my dad telling me this, when he wanted to learn about history, he had to go to the public library to go through, ask the librarian where the book is, go through, read the book, go back home, then write it down or stay. And it was very difficult for them. But we have so much of information, and because we have so much of information, I think that we have more understanding of the world, right, than maybe the previous generations before us. What I mean by that is, the reason I believe that the world is continuously opening up and liberalizing to certain issues is that we have the information, and we have the ability also to comprehend that information and create that sort of change in places where change needs to happen, right? So I believe that that's an advantage that our generation has.
Yeah, I would like to add up something for that. Gen Z, I feel like they are lazy, not in a bad way. They are lazy in a good way, because I feel like they are quick to find shortcuts. Because if we give them a task, like, they are people that don't like to waste their time at all. So they will always come up with an easy and a better alternative to quickly do that task. So I think if
more efficient.
Maybe
way. Shortcuts is a negative term, but yeah, efficiency. Yeah.
So in a more efficient way, they have found a way to utilize the resources that's available. So I think if that aspects of the Gen Z is touched, I think we can do a greater thing for the country's advancement.
Something though that I've realized, like with everything that was said, like even in terms of like work culture, I feel like people in Gen Z are much more quick to criticize something within work culture that they like disagree with, like this is not okay. Whereas like most of the old generations would be like it is what it is, and not like work culture in individual offices, but like the entire field itself. I just think that something that I've realized is like most of the Gen Zs are in their 20s, and because they're in their 20s, like a lot of us are still also in the process of figuring things out, like careers, jobs, and because of that, people are not willing to give us a lot of leeway in that sense. Like you're very quick to criticize someone from Gen Z, but when you look at your father's generation, when you look at like your grandparents' generation, I'm sure they made plenty of mistakes too in their 20s where they were like too curt, maybe they were a bit too entitled. So I think that's also something which people...
So at this coming election in Sri Lanka, 18 to 35-year-olds are going to make up around 35% of the voting bloc. That's a pretty sizable amount. And the good news is they don't think, like you just said, like generations before. There is an ability to be critical in your thinking, to question the answer, really poke at it, to really see, is there, for lack of a better word, is this BS or is there substance in this? Is it based on truth? Many other generations, if you had what the kind of governance we had during the former president's era, it'll be like, what to do? We can't do anything about it, let's just toughen up, we love our country, let's do what we can, tighten our belts. But this is, no, we can do something about it. You go home. And you stayed there till they went home. And then the uncles and aunties and everybody got excited and came and supported it. So there was an intergenerational effort. But later on, politicians came and ruined it. But my reality is that critical thinking. So, as a critically thinking generation, you may be the vaccine that this nation needs to finally think for yourself. Not be blindly loyal to saying, oh, when it comes to politics, have you heard this term? Maybe your generation have heard, even if you cut me, I'm green, or I'm blue, or I bleed red, or this, I can't think differently. That's what so I don't care even if my guy is a rogue, he's my guy. And as a result, or they'll say, it's better to go with the known devil than the unknown angel. So now we've gone with the known devil to hell. That kind of reality. So it's critical thinking. So what are you looking for in political leadership? What are you looking for in the next breed of policymakers in this country? What are certain aspects, values, maybe initiatives, maybe substance? What is something that you're looking for saying, this is what I would like to see? This is a step in the right direction.
What I want to see a government who is against corruption and who are accountable and who are transparent, even using public funds. If they're using funds for their campaign, for their party campaign, but we want to see how, where are this money coming from? Even for the campaign, we want to see proof. So transparency of proofs, transparency of using public funds. We want to see accountability and good policies. A party that, like my peer here mentioned, respecting women and women in authority. We believe women in authority. We don't see much women politicians in parliament. I think it's less than 10, if I'm right. So we want to see more participation of women in authority and good policies. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
I think what I'd really like to see in a future one day that none of us can foresee is a parliament where the government as well as the opposition both accept a policy. I think a day that happens, when it's the right policy that comes onto the table, would be a day where Sri Lanka changes for the better.
So basically, when it's come to the parliament system, what I would like to see is during those discussions, I would like to see more solutions than gossips. And also it's very hilarious that we actually, like, if I ask myself, we really don't know what's happening inside, right? If someone asks me, if my friend asks me what's happening inside, there is a gap between us and the parliament, which I am not able to explain what exactly happening, because we only see their public debates. They go like, it's I think, I'm not very sure, every Monday and Friday, I guess. I'm not very sure. So somehow, if they can bridge the gap, in the sense if they can connect with the community and explain like behind the scenes what exactly happening, the workload they're going through, so we can clear this misunderstanding, because we can understand what exactly they're going through behind those debates. In the sense, I'm sure there are rooms in the parliament, right, and they discuss every day about those problems. So exactly what are the problems as youth, how we can contribute. I guess there is a system, but still if they can get ourselves more involved and community more involved, and if the community can follow the right to truth act more, and if they can be a bit bold more and do the follow up, the people we are elected, what they are doing now, are they doing okay? We have the right, we just can't vote and come home and stay. We have that responsibility to know what they are doing right now after that election, right? So what I want to see, like I'm trying to clear my thoughts, like every thoughts are coming here and there, but what I wanted to see in one sentence is knowing our system, what's happening inside. And I think there is this website where we can connect with the ministers as well, but we don't get the use of it. So we have the tools as well, they have provided, and it's sad we go and complain about with our family members and cousins without directly getting involved with the people who are responsible to each department. So if we can be more accountable for our future, I guess it is the most beautiful thing we can see. Yeah.
So you want transparency and accountability from Parliament, but also citizens taking action to make sure that you have the transparency and the accountability, and you're part of the democratic process.
The main issue is that this economic crisis is happening, and also like the potential outcomes is that like people are talking and saying like in the future it might be like a 2021 situation, 2022 situation where like fuel crisis has happened, petrol shortages, electricity being cut, and the cost of living going up higher. And I know that there are negotiations with the IMF have already been set. Like, it's going to be a lot more difficult if you go back and renegotiate, if you're constantly renegotiating with the IMF. In a situation like that, what is like the possibilities and like looking at politicians who understand that and who are not trying to take negotiations on a level where it suits them. I think there's in politics in general, you tend not to make deals unless it benefits like you. This is not just like in Sri Lanka, it happens worldwide. But I think the difference is like people in general want things, and I think that is inherently human. But the issue is when politicians go into power, they tend to prioritize the wants that they have and wants of a particular sector of society, like the very 1% of like Sri Lanka, and like their own political friends, political parties, and benefit them, and they forget like there are people where 1,000 rupees is a lot of money, where even spending 2,000, like you have to scrape for it. And I think that is something which is never addressed. And I think self-interest is something which, while it's a very human thing, has to be like, it would be nice to see politicians who work against such self-interest and actually bring practical solutions instead of saying rhetoric like, we'll renegotiate with the IMF, we'll work on decreasing the cost of living. How are you going to do that? What are the policies in place? And I feel like there's a lack of exposure on that.
Okay.
So for me, it's just more about transparency and fulfilling mandate, right? For me, transparency in the sense, I don't know if this happens, but in my 20 years of life, I've never seen it. Like it would be great if they publish the minutes of what happens in Parliament, right? Not only the public debates, but what happened to like on a website or on the newspapers, or some dedicated form to where we can access the minutes in all three languages so that we know exactly what's going on. Two, if they want to implement a policy, why don't they have more polls, right? Like in other countries, like I think the United States has like quarterly polls for any policy that they want to implement or any issue that's going on, right? So if they actually implement something like that, then I think people, not only us, but like the old generation will also have an accurate idea of what's going on, And for me, it's more of them just fulfilling their mandate. If you get elected, then fulfill your mandate, or so I was watching this video recently on YouTube where Warren Buffett, he actually says that he can solve like America's debt crisis in 5 seconds. So he says, if the GDP of the country, the deficit of GDP is more than 3%, all sitting members of Congress are ineligible for re-election, right? So that is a deterrent, right? A very strong one. I don't think that will ever get passed in any country, but that sort of deterrent is necessary because people who are in power enjoy it. They want to stay there, right? In a way, because there are so many benefits to them as well. So if you give them a reason to work and a fear of losing that power, then they are more inclined to work, right? So I believe that we need strong policy, strong deterrence to ensure that there's more accountability and transparency in Parliament and in other policy making.
I can remember a small incident that happened. So it was the first time that we got a chance to visit the Parliament. So I was so much excited to see finally we get a chance to go and look there. But unfortunately, when we went there, it was similar to the classroom we have. So I mean, it's sad to say, but that's a reality. But what I expect is even in the future, when we are married and when we have kids, we can someday show them, hey, this is our Parliament, and see that the real way our nation is being run. And even if at that time, if their children also have the courtesy of being proud of, hey, this is my father who's in the Parliament, I think then they have done a great job. So I think if that kind of thing happened in the correct way, I think our country can move on as well.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, Nabil, Subhashi, Shavindi, Shakib and Hudson. Really appreciate your insights. I believe you, just by sharing your thoughts, you're inspiring those who are listening and hopefully helping every Sri Lankan be the best version of themselves and be part of the solution. Not to shy away, not to walk away, be bold as you said, be critical in our thinking and be people who push for solutions and transparency. So thank you for all those who are watching. This is just the first of Conversations with Gen Z. I'll join you again in a few weeks from Moroto University and then also followed by Matara and a conversation in Trincomalee. More to come. We've a lot to learn from Gen Z. Thank you.